In the early 1800s, a Dr. Thomas Baudelaire and his sister Henrietta published The Family Shakespeare, which was essentially most of Shakespeare's works edited to omit or to modify portions that had, say, sexual references or what the two considered sensitive for children or female readers. That's where the term Baudelaireize comes from. Hello and welcome. This is your weekly fix. I'm Smitha Nair. Why are we talking about this? Because children's literature, quite like school history textbooks, has often been a battleground of this kind of censorship. Recently, it was reported that publisher Puffin hired sensitivity readers to scrutinize British best-selling writer Roald Dahl's books and to rewrite portions they deemed offensive. As per reports, among other changes, Oompa Loompas are now gender neutral, Augustus Gloop is now enormous instead of fat, and Mrs Twit won't be referred to as ugly. Well, I'm delighted to be joined today by two beloved children's book authors, Menaka Raman and Sowmya Rajendran. Their books occupy pride of place in children's bookshelves across the country. Thanks so much, both Sowmya and Menaka, for agreeing to this conversation on Scroll.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well, Smitha. Pleasure to be here.
Right. To begin with, the reactions to this Roald Dahl rewrite business have ranged from folks decrying that their childhood classics are now being 1984. For the uninitiated, this is in reference to George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984. To those who say that the changes in no way take away from the delightful nastiness, which is really the essence of Dahl's writing, and ask if it is such a bad thing to say that fat should stop being a synonym for malevolent or despicable or hateful. I want the both of you to take this question. Menaka, perhaps you could go first.
Sure. I think I would like to answer this as a writer myself and kind of take that approach. I think that my issue with this whole thing is that it's been done at a time when the author himself cannot have a say and is not being consulted about this entire process. He's no longer alive. Roald Dahl famously rewrote how he had Chocolate Factory because there was a big outcry. Someone finally realized that it was terribly problematic and racist, and after a lot of back and forth, public back and forth, he said, okay, I'm going to rewrite this, and he did it himself. I think that's one thing. I think to take a call as a publisher, as an estate of the author, and to do this, I think it's, where does it end? Also, I don't think that any of us can write in a way in which our books will be for everyone, which will be kind of welcomed with open arms by all readers. We can't possibly hope to, cater to each and every person's individual sensitivities, the things that they're not comfortable with. So I think that is really my issue with this, is that it's been done, and this person has no say so. And yes, there are sensitivity readers, and yes, they've worked with an organization to do it. But I think that's my issue with this.
Sowmya?
I agree with what Menaka is saying, and I think it's also important to see the context in which this is happening. So this, I believe, has happened because Netflix has bought over the Roald Dahl estate, and they are going to launch shows based on his books, and that is why this whole sensitivity reading is happening. Now, I don't have a problem with a screen adaptation of the books that takes care of modern sensitivities and sensibilities, because that's going to be acknowledged in the credits. They're going to say that this is an on-screen adaptation of the books and it has been done by so and so. But if you're going back to the original and changing how the writer conceptualized these characters, that to me smacks of dishonesty. And I think it's also disrespectful to the reader, because you're denying them a chance to engage with this author. You're denying them a chance to critique his works. And where does it really stop? Because everybody's writing is a product of their time and culture. So are you going to then give the reader the impression that Dahl was somebody that he was not, right? So you can't go back in time and put words into the mouth of somebody who can't speak for themselves right now. So I think it strikes me as a very dishonest act.
Right. Like there was a screen adaptation for The Witches written by Roald Dahl. It was made into a movie. I haven't watched it, but it was widely panned by critics for, sort of not falling on either side and not being true also to the book, as it were. I, in particular, found the slippery slope argument that is often made when, we talk about censorship. And that argument was made by PEN America in its statement, and I found that persuasive. I just want to read a bit from what they said. They wrote, they said, those who might cheer specific edits to Dahl's work should consider how the power to rewrite books might be used in the hands of those who do not share their values and sensibilities. That is an issue too, isn't it, Sowmya?
Absolutely. I think that we tend to believe that if you're doing it from a liberal perspective, then automatically it's for the good of everybody. But you can't, apply these principles selectively, right? So if you're going to give people the right to go back and change what somebody said without their consent, then that principle has to apply for everybody. So that really, it really bothers me. So then what are we going to do? Are we going back to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which begins with a line on how a single man in possession of a good fortune should be in want of a wife? Are we then going to say, oh, but then that's not necessarily true, maybe women can also be scientists or whatever? You can't like wokify that line, because Jane Austen was talking about a certain period and culture where this was true. So I don't think we should really be doing this. I completely disagree with changing somebody's words without their consent, no matter where they fall in the spectrum.
Right. To that, somebody may counter and say adult fiction is different from children's fiction, and an adult reading Pride and Prejudice will perhaps know that this is a product of the times, whereas children, on the other hand, need like PG-13, parental guidance to.
But we read, we had Pride and Prejudice in our college syllabus when I was doing my BA in English, and we were still at a very impressionable young age. We were, so to speak, we were soon to be brides at that age group. So you can still argue that, and literature at any time does have an influence on you, right? And why do we assume that children can't think for themselves? Why don't we enable their critical ability? That's what I want to say to all of this. Why do we need to limit this ability in children to engage with ideas and think for themselves? Why do we assume that they just kind of absorb everything and don't think about it at all?
Minka?
I absolutely agree with Sowmya here about the point that first of all, I think everyone should read children's books, adults as well. I think they will benefit from the exercise greatly. But I think Soumya's right. Why are we assuming that children are just going to kind of read something and immediately get influenced by it and think that's the only way? I've seen with my own two children, I have seen when I visit libraries and schools, children are able to very quickly point out things which don't sit well with them or which they're not comfortable with. And they're very quick to question some of these things. So I think just to say that, oh, we're kind of protecting children, from these things in life and they shouldn't have to deal with them. I think that's a bit lazy. And I think that's very patronizing on the part of adults. And we should be able to allow them to read these things, question them, and then we should be willing to kind of step forward and have those conversations with them as well.
Yeah, just to add to what Menaka was saying, Smitha, if I may. My daughter loves Matilda, and her favorite character is really Miss Trunchbull. It's not, she thinks Miss Honey is a really colorless and boring character, but she is the good person, according to Roald Dahl's book. But she loves Miss Trunchbull because she's reading it in her context. Where she's aware of misogyny, she's aware of patriarchy, and she's aware of all these things. So Miss
Right.
Trunchbull to her just looks like this really fun and assertive woman who does what she wants. So she really enjoys that. So I don't think we should assume on behalf of children how they should be enjoying a book or how they should interpret it.
Right. You've sort of, both the two of you already answered what was to be my next question about the so-called power of books, or children's books in particular, to reinforce stereotypes. And I know I have this conversation very often with my friends, colleagues in journalism who are also parents, and Enid Blyton always comes up, as she does, given the power of Enid Blyton's books to date. So many decades after she wrote it, and I try and go back and think about what I took away from the books, and I loved them. I mean, what I remember is the thrill of adventure. But I also now, I mean, this may be sort of reinforced memory. Okay, I don't know, because of what I now think of her books. I cringe at some of what she's written. I look at it as at a subliminal level, taking away the message that girls are supposed to be a certain way. That George's character in particular, I thought that if you look like a girl and behave like a girl, there was something wrong with you were not cool enough, and you had to be George, with your hair cut and behave like the boys to be cool or important or relevant. But that's I don't know. What do you think of it?
I mean, I wasn't a big Enid Blyton fan as a child at all. I actually only read Roald Dahl because to me, Blyton's books were too good. Everyone was just too good and too earnest. And there was that wickedness and that. I think also as a child, I loved that the adults got what was coming to them at the hands of these children. That was so empowering as a young person to think, this too is possible. But I've read Blyton to my kids. And, whether it's, I think, Magic Faraway Tree or Cherry Tree Farm, the girls are also sometimes kind of, we'll now stay at home and do these and let the boys go off and take care of this, which really irritated me. And a couple of times I did some of the sensitivity rewriting and I changed the characters around. And when I was reading it to them, I kind of just changed who did got to do what. But then I kind of thought, well, that's not fair either. And then I would read it to them and think, well, what do you think of this? And, anything coming up for you? And then they would actually say, sometimes they would be like, no, this is all fine and it's great and fun. And sometimes they would be like, well, why are they leaving her behind? And why are these boys going off to do this? So I think, yes, the fascination for Blyton is still very much here. I think parents buy her books for their children because in a way they're trying to pass on this, how they felt when they were reading their books and they want to kind of share that with their kids and things like that. But I think there's so much exciting new books being written for young readers across age groups, And yes, while books can reinforce certain harmful stereotypes, of course, they can also shatter these stereotypes and present to readers very different ways of living, being, thinking. And books have that power as well.
Right. And the two of you, Sowmya, before you come in here, the two of you are doing that. And my daughter, Loki, is one of my daughter's favorite characters ever, and she's a big reader, so she has a bigger bookshelf than me now. Lokanayaki, and interestingly, she's only 8, but she's obviously heard these conversations. One of the big takeaways from it is she hadn't figured out, about menstruation, for instance, and Loki talks about it with her. Her grade mates have all got their periods and she hasn't got it, and then she came to me and it was such a natural conversation that flowed from it. So, Menka, you've done a bit of my parenting for me by writing that book. Similarly, Sowmya, with your books, I think I've told you this before, that The Weightlifting Princess, she was fascinated by that book for when she was younger. So again, sorry, Sowmya, if you can come in here on this reinforcing of stereotypes.
So I should say that I owe my literary career to Enid Blyton because I was such a huge fan of Blyton that I didn't have any other ambitions in life as a child. I just wanted to be a writer. So while I acknowledge that, I do see problematic characterization and plot lines in her books, and I've learned from that. I've learned what not to do when I'm writing a book. So I've learned a lot from her on what to do, and I've also learned a lot from her on what not to do. And coming back to the character of George, from the famous Five, my daughter, when she read it, she asked me if George is a trans kid. So because she is reading it in a context where she's aware of these terms, so she's able to interpret it like that. Whereas it never occurred to me to think of that when I was a child, because I never knew what a transgender person was when I was a child. So I think we need to understand that readers read books in their own context. They are reading books evolve with time because the readers are different. So I think that we need to look at it from that perspective as well. So I do have a problem with stereotypes in books. But I think stereotyping happens everywhere. It's not just in books. It's there in advertising. It's there in your movies. So what are you going to do? Are you going to put your child in some kind of cave and prevent them from seeing all these things? I don't think that really helps. I think what really helps is to tell them that it is okay to question these things, and to really, when they are writing, what to be conscious of and what they can, to make their words more inclusive and diverse.
One way I thought to sort of counter what we may think is problematic is, and this is with the classics, and I wonder what you think of this, the reimagining and the retelling of classics. the fairy tales, I mean, in particular, to modern stories. For instance, my child quite liked Cinderella Liberator, that was written by a feminist author, Rebecca Solnit. It was released during the pandemic. She even did a whole sort of storytelling over Facebook, and it was quite something. So perhaps like what Sowmya said, adapting it for the screen, but also perhaps adapting it in a completely different book instead of messing with the original.
So I've actually done a collection of fairy tale retellings called "Girls to the Rescue." It's published with Tulika, and that's because I got tired of the damsel in distress stereotype in all the fairy tales that I was reading out to my daughter. So
Right.
I wrote a fresh, set of fairy tales using the same characters, but then doing it as a retelling. And the book acknowledges that these are retellings and why I've done them as well. So, and it's not that I prevented my child from reading the originals either. She's read both of them, so she has the option to read what she wants. She has the freedom to decide what she likes.
Yeah, and I haven't read any of these retellings, but I just want to kind of refer again to The Weightlifting Princess, which kind of takes the whole princess trope and just turns it on its head, right? And I I remember reading that book for the first time and thinking, this is great. And this is, she has her biceps, she's lifting weights, she's fantastic. And I also love that little inclusion of the mother, and kind of her own feelings about this when and I think those kind of books are fantastic. There's another great princess book. I think it's The Princess with the Very Long Hair, published by Katha. And spoiler alert, but she goes and shaves all her hair off and she's liberated and happy at the end of it, bald. And I love books like that. And I think, we should have more kind of alternate tellings of some of these kind of stories, which anyway, in some way, they kind of exist in the public domain, right? They're all kind of passed on now from generation to generation. And I think it's great that this generation has, new versions of some of these stories to make their own.
Right. Now, in the US, in America, there's been this long sort of debate. It's been going on for years now on the structural biases that exist in the publishing industry. Predominantly Protestant white male, as they say, that makes it difficult for certain kinds of authors and their works to get published. It's still apparently true from what I read in sort of analysis of what the publishing industry is like in America. There's also this widespread sort of parent driven, and you see this on Twitter very often. I follow a number of parents who write about what it is like, what schooling is like in America, on censorship on what books can be taught in schools and available in public school libraries, all these school district boards, etc., that exist. And it appears that progressive books are the ones that have been victims of this censorship. I haven't seen this really being a subject of debate much in India because I don't know why that is. Maybe you all know better because you're part of, your authors, been part of this publishing industry for a while.
Okay, shall I take this one first, maybe? So first of all, I think that there is some version of this happening, like first to speak to the whole idea of having more diverse voices in publishing. I think that we have seen in the last few years, especially in picture books, middle grade and young adult, there has been a move, I think, and a concerted effort by publishers, whether it's Pratham Books, whether it's Tulika, to really kind of go out and have own voices, stories, and to really champion some of these kind of movements. And you've seen a fantastic range of books come out from some of our publishers in an effort to do this. I mean, are we there yet? Is it all kind of perfect and ready? No, there is a long way to go, but it's great to see that there is this recognition and that there is this movement. I think, I don't know, Sowmya, am I going to get in trouble for saying this? But I think the children's publishing is predominantly female, women, and from a
You have
certain
to say,
privilege.
Menka, we lost you for like a second there. So the key part, you said I'm going to get into trouble, and then you sort of froze for a second.
It was like my computer telling me not to do it. I was going to say that. I think in India, children's publishing is predominantly a lot of women in the space, and many of us from privileged classes and and communities. So I think that is definitely there. Having said that, I think publishers are doing what they need to, or they're trying to kind of take things in a different direction, which is welcome and important. To answer the second part about censorship, I think the censorship is maybe not yet come to a larger forum of social media and those kind of debates. But I think if you look at it, there is censorship happening from the child in the bookstore wanting to, or a library wanting to get a certain book, and a parent looking at it and saying, you don't want to read that, and chucking it to the side and saying you should read this instead. To On my school parent WhatsApp groups, there was an outroar earlier this year because some parents took offense to a text being taught to high schoolers which had a sex scene in it. And and they were like, we're going to write to the school and they can't be teaching these things to our children and they can't be doing this and they can't be doing that. And I'm like, hold on, all our kids are like 14, some of them are already 15. What world are you existing in? Or when they do the highwayman and some parent is like, these kind of things. So it's happening. Parents are constantly trying to censor what their kids are reading or kind of guide them in a direction which they think is appropriate. I think on a larger level, we have seen some books. There was a picture book that came out a few years ago that had to be recalled because the sentiments of a particular community were offended, and that book had to be brought back from the market. I know Paro Anand, the writer, has said that parents have protested to their schools of having some of her books there because there are interfaith relationships between young people in the books. So these are things that are happening. And I also think that given the direction in which our country is, going right now, already is in the path we're on, I think we can only possibly see more instances of this maybe coming in the months and years ahead.
Sowmya, as you answer that question, I just want to add to it. This is anecdotal evidence again. So your book on Baba Sahib Ambedkar, the boy who asked questions. So this a parent told me. So this was her the birthday giveaways. Is that what is it called? I forget what it's called.
Return gift.
Return gift, when you call people for parties and you give them gifts. Okay, so your book was the return gift. So there was apparently like not many of them were happy to read it, but there was some discomfort with a couple of other parents because they're like, should 7-year-olds be reading about caste? Because this is essentially a subject that every upper caste Hindu household skirts around.
Yeah, so your first question was on the people who get to write. So I just want to add add to what Menaka said. I think being in the arts comes with a certain amount of privilege in India because it does not pay. It's not going to pay your bills. So if you want to write children's books and pay your bills, then you have to be doing something in addition to that. And I think it's only a very small section of privileged people who get to do that, and that certainly reflects in the kind of literature that we produce, even though publishers are doing their best to increase diversity and so on. And I don't see that situation changing too dramatically in the near future, as long as the commercials are what they are. Speaking of censorship, I have had my Mayal books being pulled off reading programs from schools because they address growing up issues. They have a young child wondering about sex, what really happens, the physical changes that are happening with her body, and so on. And there have been not just parents but older kids themselves who've been uncomfortable with the idea of their younger siblings reading this. And they've kind of gone to teachers saying, should we really be having such a book in the library? So I think that we as a society have a lot of discomfort with sex, and especially seeing that in a book really unsettles people. So there was this young girl who wrote an email to me actually, saying she was very uncomfortable with Mayil discovering a period stain in her underwear. So this is a very, very common thing. It's happened to all of us. But to see that being written out in a book really, really made this child feel uncomfortable. And she wrote to me about it. And then we kind of had a conversation around it. And then she saw why it was there in the book. And of course, when it comes to adults, adults are forever trying to control what children think and what they do. So, this censorship happens very naturally over there. So I've had adults, like Menaka said, they're constantly trying to put children off books by forcing books that they don't want to read on them. So in India, if you're reading, if a child picks up a picture book and then there's only 150 words in the book, but the book is priced 200, the parent does the math and is like, no, this is not worth it. Take this GK book. Read it. This is good for you. So right from that to the themes, what really causes them discomfort, so there's a lot of controlling and censorship happening there. But I also think that readers will seek out the books that they want. So children will find a way, if they are interested, if they're committed readers, then they'll find a way to find those books.
Um, my final question, I wanted to actually ask you also about how the two of you have dealt with religious epics, and do your kids read them, etc. I don't know whether we have the time for that. Maybe like after we are done with the last question, because mine has recently taken to mine is a product of an interfaith marriage. So she has been reading a bit of the Bible. She's been reading the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the ones that we've, and she has many questions, and she's constantly angry about what's written in it. So that's perhaps another. My final question again, as writers, two questions, two things that you grapple with, and how do you grapple with? One, are you constantly thinking about the fact that your book shouldn't stray very far from what may be acceptable to a majority of parents? Because as Sowmya keeps pointing out, the commercials come into question as well. Parents are gatekeepers here. What parents think will affect the sales of your books, perhaps. So does that play on your mind? And B, generally, how much of this argument by publishers, I don't know, what's the feedback you get from publishers on whether children as a cohort should or should not be exposed to the unpleasantness of the adult world to such a great extent? I mean, a little bit perhaps is all right, but you have to be careful about how you sort of write it.
I don't think about parents at all when I'm writing. I think I'm predominantly writing for myself at that age. I don't know even if that's right or wrong, but I'm writing for the 8-year-old me or the 13-year-old me, and I'm really writing for her. And I'm thinking about the books that I loved at that age. When I was 13, I only read Judy Blume, and that's all I wanted. And she's one of the most banned authors in America. But I don't think I think about the parents at all. I'm just thinking about, okay, is this a story I want to tell? Am I having fun telling it? And I think, like Sowmya said before, I think readers will find their ways around parents and librarians and teachers and these other gatekeepers and get their hands on the books they want. It's how I read Jackie Collins at age 12, which I don't think my mother expected for me at all, but I managed to do it. So I think kids are going to get, okay, I'm not suggesting that other 12-year-olds out there read Jackie Collins. Please don't. It scarred me for a while, but I think readers will get to the books that they want to read in many ways. And also to this point of, should we be shielding our children from these difficult realities of life? I think we all forget that being a kid is really hard and horrible. Okay, it's not fun. We all, as adults, we have this wonderful idyllic version of our own childhoods where it was all unicorns and rainbows. But bullying at the hands of adults, right, on an everyday basis, racism, casteism in India, they are facing all of these things. So what exactly are we hoping, what are we trying to shield them from through our books? What is that happening over there? So I don't think, and I think books are the safest way for young people to engage with some of these difficult topics and see how they feel about them.
Sowmya?
So writing for me is really a healing process where I'm just articulating things to myself, and I'm breaking down ideas to myself. So I'm just talking to myself, and I start writing, and I don't even know most times where that idea is going. And then I don't know, sometimes it turns into a picture book, sometimes it is a young adult novel. I really don't know. So I don't think about parents or publishers or editors when I'm really writing that idea. If it is good enough and I'm happy with what I've produced, I send it to the publishers, and then if they like it, they take it. That's about it. So I don't think beyond that at all. Yeah, what was your the second part? Was there a
I
second
mean,
part?
exposing kids to unpleasant subjects. I mean,
Yeah. So I think the world is an unpleasant place, and kids are dealing with it constantly. So what exactly are we trying to protect them from, right? So they're confronting all these things, they are seeing all these things. So I think just telling them that you just have to think about math and science and nothing else, and it's just going to mess the child up. So the earlier they discover that the world is not a perfect place, the earlier they learn to navigate it. And I think that's really your job as a parent, to empower them to navigate it in the way that they think is best for them, and not make all the decisions on their behalf.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I've taken 30 minutes of your time already, but this was edifying. This was also fun, like your books are. Menaka, Raman, Sowmya, Rajendran, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us in this conversation here at Scroll.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Smitha.